on my first day at a new job, I noticed a framed photo of my husband sitting on my coworker's desk. My heart nearly stopped. I kept my face calm, walked over and casually asked, "Who's that?" She smiled instantly and picked up the frame. "That's my boyfriend," she said proudly. "We've been together for 3 years." I stared at the photo, then back at her. She had no idea who I was. He made eggs that morning. That detail matters to me now in a way it didn't then. He stood at the stove in the gray t-shirt he slept in, sliding 2 eggs onto my plate, and he said, "Big day. Knock them dead." Then he kissed the top of my head, and the kiss smelled like a coffee and toothpaste. And I walked out of our apartment believing I was the luckiest woman on the 9th floor of any building in the city. The new office was 12 blocks from her place. I'd left a job I'd been at for 6 years because this one came with a better title and a team of my own, and I had spent the whole weekend preparing the way you prepare for a first day at 34. New blazer notes on every name in the org chart. A promise to myself that I would be calm, warm, unflappable, the woman who has it together. The floor was open plan with low frosted partitions, and my desk sat against one of them. On the other side was a project assistant, mid-20s, the kind of person who has clearly been told her whole life that she lights up a room and has decided to believe it. She stood up before I'd even set my bag down and introduced herself with both hands wrapped around mine. She'd stocked my drawer with pens. She'd printed the Wi-Fi password on a card and taped it to my monitor. She told me she'd been assigned to support my projects and that everyone was so excited I was finally here. I was still saying thank you when I saw the frame. It sat on the left corner of her desk next to a small potted succulent, angled so it caught the light from the windows. Silver frame, spotless, the kind of clean that means someone wipes it down. And inside it, smiling at me with a smile I had been waking up next to for 9 years, was my husband. The rest is in the part 1. I can't stop relaying the hook of my whole life. I kept my face calm. I walked over. I asked who he was, light as anything, and she picked the frame up like it was a metal she'd won. 3 years, she said. 3 years. Here is what nobody tells you about a moment like that. There is no music. The fluorescent lights don't flicker. The room stays exactly the same temperature. Somewhere behind me, a printer was jamming and a man was complaining about the printer jamming. And I stood there nodding at a photograph of my husband on a beach. And not just any beach. I knew that beach. I knew that shirt, navy with the small tear at the hem. He refused to let me fix because I bought it for him for our 5th anniversary. I knew the exact afternoon that photo was taken because I was the one holding the camera.
Yeah.
Original sits in a frame on our bedroom dresser. In the original, my hand is resting on his chest, my ring catching the sun. In her copy, the photo had been cropped. My hand was gone. I had been cut out of my own photograph, and the woman at the next desk had been polishing the frame. I said the only thing a person can say. I said he was handsome. She agreed so fast it was almost sweet. Then she kept going because she was the kind of person who keeps going. They'd met 3 years ago at a conference. She said he worked in private investments, traveled constantly for clients, worked brutal hours, but he never missed their Thursday dinners. He had proposed in the spring. She held up her left hand, and a diamond the size of my thumbnail threw light across the partition. They were getting married in October, a garden venue upstate. She'd already found the dress. And was I married? Did I have kids? She wanted to know everything about me. Married? I said 7 years. No kids. 7 years, she repeated like I'd said I had walked here from another century. That's so beautiful. I hope we make it that long. At 9:20, I went to the bathroom on the far side of the floor, locked the stall, and stood very still. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that because everything that came after depends on it. I stood there and I counted the tiles on the wall, 14 across, and I waited for the shaking in my hands to become something I could use. My phone was in my pocket. I could have called him. I could have called my sister, my best friend, his mother. I could have walked back out there and turned that frame around and asked her how long. She'd known. I didn't do any of it. Some animal part of me already understood that the moment I made a sound, I lost control of everything that happened next. So I flushed a toilet I hadn't used, washed my hands, fixed my lipstick, and went back to my desk. And for the next hour, I typed numbers into a spreadsheet that meant nothing while the woman 3 feet away from me hummed to herself and answered texts from my husband. I got home at 6 o'clock. The apartment did what it always did, which was look like roof. The sofa we'd argued about for 2 weeks and then loved the dining table from his grandmother on the bedroom dresser, the original photograph uncropped, my hand on his chest. I stood in front of it for a long time. Then I straightened it half a centimeter the way I always did and started dinner I didn't eat. He came home at 10:40 smelling like a restaurant we had never been to together. Client. Dinner ran long. He said the usual apology, the usual kiss on the forehead. He asked about my first day, and I said, the people seemed nice, and he said, of course they did. Who wouldn't love you? And he was asleep in 4 minutes. I lay in the dark next to him and did math. 3 years, 150 Thursdays, give or take. 2 birthdays of mine. 1 anniversary trip where he checked his phone on the beach and told me it was the market. Sometime around 2 o'clock in the morning, the shaking stopped for good and a decision arrived. In its place, fully formed, cold, and smooth as a river stone. I was not going to cry, and I was not going to scream. Crying gets you sympathy. Records get you everything else. He left at 7 o'clock the next morning for a standing Saturday tea. Time I no longer believed in, and I sat down at the kitchen island with my laptop and a cup of coffee and opened our joint bank account the way you'd open a door you suspect has something behind it. We'd had the account since the wedding, mortgage, utilities, groceries, travel. He handled the investments because that was his work and his language. And I handled the day-to-day, which in practice meant I paid the bills on the 5th of every month and never read past the totals. Trust does that. It teaches you to skim. I stopped skimming. I downloaded 24 months of statements every page, and I read them line by line with a pen. The florist showed up first, a shop downtown one, $200 a month, the 15th of every month. Going back as far as the statements went, $1,200 a month in flowers. I sat with that number for a while. In 7 years of marriage, I could count my flowers on one hand, and 2 of those were apologies. I had told myself he wasn't a flowers person. It turned out he was an extremely consistent flowers person. The flowers just didn't come to me. I started a list on a yellow legal pad, and then I thought better of it and bought a $19 flash drive from the pharmacy on the corner instead. And from then on, the list lived there, and the drive lived in the zipped inner pocket of a winter coat I never wore. By noon, I had rules, and the rules were the only thing that made the next month survivable. So I'll set them down the way I wrote them. 1 act. Exactly normal. Not nicer, not colder. Normal is a frequency, and he had 9 years of recordings of mine. 2, tell no one. Yet. Not my sister, not a friend, no one. Whose face could give me away at a dinner. 3, copies of everything kept. Somewhere he had never once looked. For never search any of it on the home, Wi-Fi, or the work computer. The branch library 10 blocks away had public terminals, and no one there knew my name. 5, no confrontation until the file was finished. A half-built case is worse than none. You only get to be surprised. At him once. I read the rules twice and then I added a sixth one because I knew myself and I knew what the nights were going to be like. 6. You are allowed to fall apart for 10 minutes a day in the shower with the water running. Then you turn the water off. The ring was in the October statements. A jeweler. Downtown, $4,000 charged on a Tuesday at 1:47 in the afternoon. A date I cross. Referenced against his calendar, which said he was at a portfolio review. $4,000 paid out of the account my paychecks went into for a diamond I had seen that very week, throwing light off. Another woman's hand 3 feet from my keyboard. I want to explain what that number did to me because it wasn't the money. When he proposed to me 8 years ago on the fire escape of my old apartment with the radiator hissing behind us, he gave me a thin gold band and a speech I can still recite. He said, diamonds were for people who needed proof. He said love isn't measured in carrots, that the whole industry was a markup on insecurity, and that he wanted to marry a woman secure enough to wear something honest. I cried. I thought it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. I repeated that speech at brunches for years. I judged other women's rings quietly the way he taught me to and felt superior in my honest little band. It was never a philosophy. It was a budget. He believed in diamonds, fine. He just didn't believe in them for me. The hotel came next, and the hotel was almost funny. 3 blocks from our apartment, a boutique place with a green awning that I walked past most mornings. 3 turned dollars to $340 a night. 11 charges across the 2 years of statements, and every single one of them a Thursday. Thursday was his leadership meeting. Thursday was the night I kept dinner warm until 9 o'clock and learned not to text after 8 because the partners hated phones on the table. He wasn't even commuting to the lie. He was walking at home. I photographed the statements at 2 o'clock in the morning while he slept, standing at the kitchen island with my phone brightness all the way down. And I noticed things in that month I had spent 9 years not noticing. His phone now lived face down. It charged in his briefcase, not on the nightstand, and the briefcase had a code. He'd changed his passcode sometime in the last year, from our anniversary to something I watched him type one night through the black mirror of the window and memorized in 2 passes. The way you memorize anything when your life depends on it. I never used it. I didn't need his texts. The money was already telling me everything. And the money, unlike him, was under oath. I found the attorney by asking an old college friend a careful question about her sister's divorce, the kind of question you frame as gossip so it leaves no mark. She gave me a name. The name had an office 11 minutes from my new job. I went on a Tuesday. I told the woman at the next desk I was getting a cavity filled, and at 12:30 I was sitting across from a woman about my age with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and a yellow pad of her own, telling the whole thing out loud for the first time. The photograph, the cropping, the florist, the ring, the 11 Thursdays. My voice stayed level the entire time, which seemed to interest her more than anything I actually said. When I finished, she asked one question. What do you want? Not how you feel. What do you want? I could have hugged her. Everything I earned, I said, and I want him to find out I knew on a day I choose, not a day he does. She nodded, like I passed something. And then she gave me 40 minutes that were worth more than the marriage. Dissipation of marital assets, she said. Money spent on an affair is money he owes back to the marital estate. And judges do not love men who buy diamonds with joint funds. Keep documenting. Date everything. Do not confront him. Do not tip him. Because the moment he knows the money starts moving and the story starts changing. Open an individual account at a different bank. Redirect my paycheck. Perfectly legal. Do it quietly and keep living the marriage. The performance, she said, taking her glasses down, is the hardest part. Most people can't do it for 2 weeks. I sat next to his girlfriend for 6 hours today, I said. I complimented the ring. She looked at me for a second. You'll be fine. I was back at my desk by 1:15 with a turkey sandwich. And when the woman at the next desk asked about the dentist, I said it was just a small filling, barely felt it. And she said I was so brave. She always needed the gas. At home, the performance ran every night at 8. I made his coffee for the morning and set it by the machine. I asked about his day. I listened to him complain about a managing partner who I now knew did not schedule Thursday meetings. I laughed in the places where my laugh had always lived. Twice that month, he looked at me a beat too long over dinner. The way you look at a picture that's been moved an inch. And both times I held the look and smiled until he went back to his late. It's a strange thing to learn about yourself at 34, that you can do this, that under the person who cries at supermarket commercials, there is a second person, patient as Winter, who has apparently been waiting her whole life for a reason to come upstairs. The hardest part was not the nights. The hardest part was that I liked her. We had lunch most days, the new manager and the assistant who'd adopted her, and she talked the way lonely, generous people talk in offerings. Within 2 weeks, I knew her mother had passed when she was 19, that she sent money home to her father anyway, that she'd worked since she was 22 without a single year off, that she kept a list in her phone of restaurants he'd promised to take her to and checked them off like a passport. He was on that list as a category of whether he was busy because he was important. He was tired because he worked so hard for their future. He was private because he'd been hurt before. I sat across 2 milk crates worth of salads and listened to my husband get translated into a saint. And I referenced every miracle against a bank statement in my head. The Thursday dinners she treasured were the boutique hotel 3 blocks from my bed. The anniversary weekend, she showed me photos of the 2 of them squinting on a dock, somewhere green lined up against the conference he'd spoken at 14 months ago. The one I packed his garment bag for. One Tuesday, she came in glowing because he'd surprised her at a sushi counter. The night before, just the 2 of them and a chef. The most romantic thing. I had eaten leftover soup that night. The charge cleared 2 days later. $480. In late month 2, a delivery arrived at the office. A glossy bag with rope handles, and she lifted out a pair of heels the color of a wound and held them up for the whole floor. He'd sent them for her final dress fitting. The girls at the desks behind us. The charge was already on my list. $700 coded to a department store 11 days old. And then there were the venue photos. A garden, upstate, white chairs on a lawn, an arch, with the leaves just turning. She leaned over the partition with her phone and genuinely asked, like my answer would go in a binder, whether I thought October was too cold for outdoor vows. I looked at the photos for a long moment. The arch, the lawn, the little stone, wall going gold in the light. October is perfect, I said, and I meant it more than she could possibly have known. She beamed and said she trusted me because I'd been married forever, and went back to her screen, and I sat there, understanding something I'd been circling for weeks. She was not lying to me. She was the only person in my life who wasn't. Every fact she gave me checked out perfectly against the records. Wrong story, perfect facts. She had no idea she'd been deposing her boyfriend for me, one lunch at a time. Then came the lunch that changed what this was. It was a Wednesday, a soup and salad place around the corner. And she was deep in wedding logistics, the deposit schedule, the band versus the playlist. When she said it casual as a weather report, thank God he's good with money. I just handed him my whole savings in the spring. And honestly, it was such a relief. I kept my fork moving. Your savings for our future. She said the words like they were one word A place you could drive to, 18,000. Everything since I was 22. He has a guy. He's growing it for the down payment. He showed me a statement last month. It's already up 9%. She laughed at herself. A little embarrassed. I cried when I signed the transfer for years of skipped vacations in one number. You know $18,000. March. I knew that number. I had highlighted that number. It sat in my flash drive as an $18,000 deposit into his personal account on March 14th. And for 6 weeks, I had assumed it was a bonus he hadn't mentioned. One more small secret on a pile of large ones. It was not a bonus. It was her. 4 years of her life wired into his checking account. And from his checking account, I knew exactly where money went. The florist that supplied her own romance, the hotel 3 blocks from my apartment, the ring on her hand. There was a real chance she had paid for a percentage of her own engagement. And the statement he'd shown her, the one that was up 9%, did not exist anywhere I had looked, which meant it existed the way the leadership meetings existed. I went very quiet inside, not the betrayed. Quiet, a new one, because here is what I understood. Sitting in that booth while she debated chicken versus salmon for 90 guests. This man was not torn between 2 women. There was no anguish double life, no love story gone sideways. There were 2 revenue streams with different maintenance schedules. I cooked and held the mortgage and provided the respectable marriage. She handed over her savings and her future and called it being taken care of. We were not rivals. We were accounts. She had been the other woman for exactly as long as it took to see the wire transfer. After that, she was just another woman sitting across a table eating the same lies with a different fork. I thought about telling her right there over the bread basket. I rehearsed the sentence twice behind my teeth, and then I set it down because I knew what would happen, because it is what I would have done 5 weeks earlier. People defend the man they love against a stranger with a story. They call the stranger jealous, crazy, mistaken. They argue with words. Nobody argues with paper. So I decided to give her paper. I built the folder over 4 nights at the kitchen island between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning while he slept, the unbothered sleep of a man whose system had worked for 3 years. I was not making a pile of evidence. A pile can be argued with. I was making a document that read in one direction that a frightened person could follow at her own desk at 8:40 on a Monday without anyone to explain it to her. And that would survive the first hour of her wanting it to be false. Page 1 was the joint account summary, our names printed together at the top because the names were the thesis and everything after was footnotes. Then the wire transfers, highlighted in yellow. Then the 11 Thursdays, the hotel's name in black and white, the dates circled in red with his text to me from 4 of those nights, printed underneath. Screenshots, time-stamped, don't wait up, leadership, ran late. Then the lorist, 26 months of the 15th. Then the jeweler, October, $4,000 with the date of the portfolio. Review beside it. Then a clean photocopy of our marriage certificate, 7 years old. Both signatures, the county seal, raised enough to shadow in the scan. I did not include a letter. I drafted one twice and burned both drafts on the stove like a melodramatic teenager, because every sentence I wrote sounded like an opinion, and the folder was not allowed to contain opinions. Instead, the last thing I did at 3:40 in the morning on the 4th night was write the sticky note. I went through 5 versions. I'm sorry, too soft. She lied to us both. Too mutual, too soon. Call me too presumptuous. In the end, I wrote my attorney's name and number, and underneath 4 words. He took yours too, because I knew her by then. I knew the heartbreak would not move her. Heartbreak freezes. She would sit with the hotel pages and find a way to make them a misunderstanding by lunch. But the 18,000 for years of skipped vacations, her father's roof. Money is the one lie the body refuses to metabolize. The heart forgives. The savings account never does. Friday, she left at 5:01 for a cake tasting. I waited until the Lord thinned out, and at 5:35, I walked around the partition and set the folder in the exact center of her desk, square to the keyboard, where it could not be mistaken for someone else's mail, the silver frame. Watch me do it. I looked at my husband's cropped smile for a moment. The tear in the hem of the shirt eyed. Bought him just out of view, and I left the building. The weekend was the longest of my life, and he had a wonderful time. Saturday, he made pancakes. He hummed at the stove. He read me a paragraph from the business section in his radio voice because it mentioned a rival he hated. And over breakfast, he floated the idea of a vacation in the spring, somewhere warm, just the two of us. You've been working so hard at the new place. I said that. Sounded nice. He squeezed my hand. There was flour on his wedding band. I watched him all weekend the way you watch the ocean, not for beauty, for movement. And there was none, no tells, no tension, no glance at the phone. Beyond the usual, the man slept 8 hours, both nights, deep and even, one arm thrown over me out of 9 years of muscle memory. He slept like a man who had never been audited. I nearly broke twice. One Saturday night when he fell asleep mid-sentence telling me a story about his college roommate, a story I'd heard 30 times, and his face went slack and young. And for 1 minute, he looked exactly like the person I married. And I lay there grieving a man who had never technically existed. And one Sunday in the shower during my permitted 10 minutes when it occurred to me with the force of a blow that the holder was sitting on a desk in a dark office and could not be taken back, that a 26-year-old who sent money to her father was going to walk in Monday morning, carrying a garment bag with a wedding dress in it, probably knowing her, and find the floor gone from under her. Light, and I had chosen the timing, the format, the font. The water ran cold before I turned it off. Sunday night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark doing the other math, the kind with no numbers, whether she'd call the attorney or call him, whether she'd believe a certificate, whether Monday would end with the alliance I was betting on, or with the two of them somehow on the same side of a table and me alone on mine. At 4 a.m., I accepted that I had done the thing the attorney told me never to do. I had made a move I couldn't take back without knowing how it would land. The alarm went off at 6:10. He groaned and pulled the pillow over his head. I was already awake, already dressed in my head, already at the office in my head, watching the elevator. You're up. Early, he mumbled. Big Monday, I said. I was at my desk at 7:55 with coffee I didn't drink, facing a spreadsheet I wasn't reading with a clear sight line to the elevators. She came in at 8:40. I knew from 50 feet her makeup was perfect, which is how I knew, because it was Monday interview perfect, rebuilt perfect, the kind of face you put on over another face. She walked the length of the floor with her chin level and her garment bag over her arm, and she did not say good morning to the two people who said it to her. She stopped at her desk. She did not sit for a moment. She stood looking down at the surface of it, and I realized she was looking at the spot where the folder had been, which meant the folder was somewhere else now, which meant it had been read. Then she turned and looked at me and the whole open plan floor with its printers and its stand-ups went very far away. I have been looked at in a lot of ways in my life. I have never been looked at like that. It was grief and fury and arithmetic, all of it moving fast, and underneath it holding the rest of the question. I didn't flinch and I didn't soften. I just let her see that I was the person she thought I was. Both of those people, the friend from lunch and the wife from page 1. What she did next, I will be describing for the rest of my life. She picked up the silver Frame. She looked at his face for a second, maybe two. Then she laid it down, flat, face against the desk with the deliberate gentleness of someone closing a casket. And she reached into her tote and slid a folder of her own across the partition to me. Hers was thicker. Bank statements, her own, with her own yellow highlights. She'd used the same color. We'd both reached for yellow. Screenshots of 3 years of texts. 11. More transfers I had never seen marching. Out of an account I did not know existed. At a credit union I'd never heard of. And on top, a deposit receipt from the Garden Venue upstate. $6,500 paid 8 weeks ago on a credit card whose number I didn't recognize, but whose name I did, because the name was his and the last name was mine. She had spent the weekend the way I had spent 3 weeks. She sat down, logged in, and spoke one sentence to her monitor perfectly. Level. The first dry-eyed sentence of the new era. My appointment with your attorney is Thursday. I hear his leadership meeting got canceled. We met Tuesday night at a diner, 2 neighborhoods from the office and 3 from my apartment, a booth in the back with a view of the door, because by then we were both thinking like that. The first 10 minutes were terrible, and they should have been. She asked how long I'd known, and I told her the truth. The first day, the frame, all of it. She asked why I hadn't told her then, and I told her that truth too, that she'd have defended him, that I needed the file finished first, that I was sorry, and that I'd do it the same way again. She stared at me for a while. Then she said, I would have called you a liar to your face, and ordered pancakes, and we went to work. Rules first, because she turned out to be a rules person too. Nothing in writing on her phone, because the phone was on his plan and he paid the bill, and we no longer assumed anything was a coincidence. A new email address each created that night on the diner Wi-Fi. Originals in 2 places, and nobody confronts him. Not a word, not a hint, no matter what we found or how it burned. She wanted to call him that night and play him the sound of oathers hitting a table. I talked her down by walking her through the attorney's logic. And somewhere in there, she stopped being the girl from the next desk and became the other analyst on the case. Then we put both timelines on the table, his 2 calendars side by side for the first time in 3 years, and watched the machinery interlock. The Thursdays I spent keeping dinner warm were her standing dinners. My anniversary dinner last June, the one he cut short for a client emergency, resumed 40 minutes later as her birthday surprise across town. She showed me the photo, time-stamped him holding a cake I'd have sworn he didn't know how to order. The conference 14 months ago was their doc weekend. He had never once been double booked. He was, she said bitterly, very good with calendars. And I wrote that down under things that are true. But the real work of that night was the account. Her 11 transfers, the ones I'd never seen, all flowed into the same place. An account at a small credit union with an upstate routing number. An account that touched nothing else in her life or mine. The transfers from his checking went back further than her statements could reach. Hers started 3 years ago. The account did not. The account was old, and it was hungry on a schedule. $2,000 a month, every month, like a mortgage. What is it? She said. It's where the money goes when it's done with us. I said, Thursday, we find out what it feeds. Thursday at the attorney's office, the 2 of us in the chairs and the folders interlaid on the desk. The attorney read for 20 minutes without speaking the way other people watch a match. Then she took her glasses down and said, he's not having an affair. He's running a balance sheet. She'd seen versions of this, she said. Rarely this disciplined. The credit union account was the thread she liked least and most. We couldn't subpoena anything yet, not before filing. And she was not ready to file because she said, you don't serve a man like this until you know what he's protecting. So she brought in a forensic accountant, a soft-spoken man with a laptop bag like a doctor's case and gave him copies of everything. And he called back in 9 days with two findings, finding one. The account was 12 years old. It predated her by 9 years. It predated me by a decade. Whatever it was, we were not its first donors, only its newest. Finding two was smaller and better, buried in. One of her transfer confirmations was a memo line the system had carried over. And the memo read, CTY tax PY county, tax prior year. The account paid somebody's property taxes. Property records are public, he said. Said, give me the counties along that routing. Number and a day. He needed in. Afternoon. The parcel came back the next evening. A house 3 hours north, for acres, modest assessment, taxes current owned. Free and cleared for over a decade by two. Names as tenants by the entirety, which, the attorney explained before I could ask, is a form of ownership available in this state only to married couples. The first name was my husband's. The second name was a woman's name neither of us had ever heard. We sat with the printout between us on the diner table that night, the two of us reading it over and over as if it would confess. She kept her finger under the second name. Then she pulled out her phone and brought up the map and typed in the address and made a sound I'd never heard from her. A small flat laugh with nothing in it. The house was 11 miles from her wedding venue. He had sat beside her tasting cakes 20 minutes drive from a property he owned as a married man with a woman who was not me. Saturday, she said it wasn't a question. Saturday, I said, we drove up Saturday in her car, 3 hours of Parkway and then county roads. The leaves just starting to turn the colors of her venue brochure. Neither of us said much. There's not much to say on the way to a house your husband owns with a stranger. It was blue clapboard at the end of a gravel drive for acres of meadow going gold, a garden by the porch that someone tended seriously. We sat in the car for a full minute. Then the front door opened on its own because in the country they see you coming. And a woman stepped out onto the porch and looked at us the way you look at weather. Moving in, she was late 40s gray coming in at the temples, a cardigan with a tissue in the sleeve. She looked at me, then at the girl beside me, then back, taking her time about it. Well, she said, which one are you two? The wife or the new one? The porch went very quiet. Both, I said. Apparently she made tea because that is what women like her do while their houses burn down. And we sat at a kitchen table older than all three of us, and she listened to the whole thing without once interrupting, her hands around her cup. When I got to the part about the property record, the two names, tenants by the entirety, she nodded slowly like a doctor hearing symptoms she'd already diagnosed. Then she went to the hall closet and came back with a firebox and set it on the table. And what was in that box rearranged my understanding of the last decade of my life. Florist receipts, a different shop 2 towns over, the 15th of every month from years before I had ever heard his name. A photograph of a much younger him on this porch, and a bank ledger in her careful handwriting, totaling what he'd taken when he left. Her savings, $31,000, moved into an investment he was managing for their future. The phrase landed on the table like a third teacup. He told me diamonds were for people who needed proof, she said, turning her bare ring finger toward us. I thought it meant he was wise. It meant he was cheap and I was the practice. He'd left 12 years into it, she said. Started traveling for a client in the city. Thursdays at first, then weekends, then gone. The divorce papers came a year later, and she'd looked at what he was offering, which was nothing, and what he'd taken, which was everything, and made the only move she had. I told him I'd sign when he paid back the $31,000. He never paid. She took a sip of her tea, so I never signed. Beside me, the girl from the next desk went still. I heard my own Voice asked it. Signed what? The woman looked at me almost kindly. Honey, she said, we're still married, 12 years in. June, he's been gone and there's no paper in any courthouse that says he's not mine. The kitchen did its quiet, roaring thing. I did the arithmetic I had been refusing to do since the Parkway. He started traveling to the city 9 years ago. The Thursdays started 9 years ago. I met him 9 years ago at a conference where he was charming and unattached and wore no ring. Every one of us had been the girl at the next desk. Once, I had just never had to see the frame. The woman watched me arrive at it. Then she nodded at the folders we'd carried in, hers to mine to the one in the tote bag. You keep records too, she said. It wasn't a question. Monday, at 10 o'clock, 3 women sat in a row in my attorney's office, and the attorney stood at the desk with the certified copies that had come back from 2 counties and validated in the flat voice of paper every word the woman from the porch had said. A marriage license, 12 years old, his name and hers, a divorce petition filed 9 years ago, his attorney's letterhead, a dismissal 13 months after that for failure to prosecute, meaning he filed it, let it die on a calendar, and never spent another dollar on it. And then the findings she read twice, once to us and once, I think, for herself. There is no decree, not in this county, not in hers, not anywhere the search reaches. The petition was dismissed and never refiled. She set the page down and looked at me. He is married to her. He has been married to her the entire time. You've known him. Your marriage is void. It isn't ending. It never legally began. She let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. And then she did the thing I will be grateful for until I die. She turned it into ammunition, which changes everything in your favor. She said, pulling our license application from the file, his confident signature at the bottom and beside the box that asked, prior marriages in his own hand, the word none. That's a false sworn statement on a government record. The marriage being void means there are no marital assets between you, which means the money he moved wasn't dissipation. It was taking your property. The 18,000. She nodded at the girl beside me was never an investment. It was theft by deception. And we can show the fake statement he used to keep you calm. And the marriage itself, she tapped the 12-year-old license as bigamy, which in this state is not a tort. It's a felony. She walked us through the order of operations like a general at a sand table. The first wife files first a real divorce, 12 years of marital claims that reached, she noted, with something like appetite into every account he thought was his. I file the action to have my marriage declared void and my property traced and returned. Every paycheck, every deposit, 7 years of it not split, returned. The girl from the next desk files the criminal complaint because hers was the cleanest theft. A wire, a lie, a fake statement, a date. And the big M, the first wife asked. The bigamy, the attorney said, is the bow. The financial crimes unit took our referral this morning. A detective will call him Tuesday between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock. They like to catch them at breakfast. She took her glasses down and looked at the 3 of us, the wife who wasn't, and the bride who never would be. Our folders interled on her desk into one document that read in one direction. He kept 2 sets of books. For 12 years, she said. He just never checked who else was keeping them. The first wife reached over and squeezed my hand once hard like a stamp coming down. Monday night, I made his coffee for the morning and set it by the machine. We ate dinner. He told a story about the markets, and I laughed in the place where my laugh had always lived. And he said we should book that spring trip before the fares went up somewhere warm. And I said that sounded nice, and he slept 8 hours deep and even, his arm over me out of muscle memory, the last night of the muscles memory. Tuesday, I was up at 6 o'clock. I packed the last of what mattered into the bag I'd been quietly filling for a week, 2 trips, worth already gone to my sister's. And then I did something I'd been planning, longer than I'd admit. I made eggs. He came out at 7:30 in the gray t-shirt, smelling like coffee and toothpaste, and lit up at the plate like it was an anniversary. Look at this, he said. Big day. Big day, I said. At 7:40, his phone rang on the counter. Unknown number. Local. He almost let it go. Then some instinct of commerce in him reached for it, because unknown local numbers are sometimes money. This is he. I drank my coffee and watched it happen. It took 4 seconds. The voice on the other end was tiny and procedural, and I caught only fragments. Detective, financial crimes. A few questions this morning, but I didn't need the words because I had the face. I had watched that face for 9 years, and it had never once shown me weather. And now the whole climate moved through it at speed. The fork stopped. The yolk bled into the toast. His eyes came up off the floor and found me across the island. And I watched him understand that I was not surprised. And then I watched him begin to understand what that meant, layer by layer. The folder, the desk, the frame, the records, all of it arriving at once like statements in the mail. He covered the phone with his hand. The detective's voice kept going, small and patient, against his palm. Do you know anything about this? He said. I set my keys on.